Okay, so Rich and I have come, we're both assistant psychologists, and just to recap why we came yesterday, we've got two ideas, so I'm sort of pitching the first one. It was to create an app to help those who have got anxiety-based disorders when they're doing their graded exposure work with their therapist. We've been really fortunate this weekend in that we've worked with two teams. I'll just give you a bit of background about graded exposure for those of you who don't know much about it. We as therapists quite unfairly put people in deliberately anxiety-provoking situations, and often there's this whole idea about avoidance, and in the short term people think that if they don't, or if they run away from certain situations, their anxiety will decrease. But what we know to be true is in fact that they will need to stay in that situation for as long as possible so that the anxiety reduces. That way the individual, the patient, will learn that it's the fact that they're remaining in the situation that decreases their anxiety and helps with their anxiety over time. So what we needed to tell them through the use of the app was to allow them to record their levels of anxiety, which we call the subjective units of distress, which are the SUD scores. That way they could graphically see their anxiety levels going over time, or going down over time. So we started off by creating a web-based app with the help of Bees apps. So Jamie's just going to sort of have a look. Well, we'll sort of guide you through it. So we've got username, password, and then I'll just wait for him to do that. And this is really good because what we didn't want is an app that was going to be too complex, because the nature of the therapy itself is really anxiety-provoking and quite distressing for them. So if we then gave them an app that was a little bit too stressful to use, that would overcomplicate things. So we wanted to do something that was very straightforward. And together with their therapist, the individual can create a hierarchy of situations and work through these hierarchies. So for example, giving presentation at NHS Health Scotland. By now, my SUDs are about a 60 out of 100. So we can type in 60, and then the app will create a graph in real time. Just hoping that will do it. Go on, Jamie, you can do it. And then over sort of every 5 minutes, the idea is that you keep track of your anxiety levels, and you can see them going down over time. So if you scroll down there, Jamie, you can see my graph starting to take shape, which is fab. So that was the first sort of thing we did. We then decided to move on to a, sorry, let me just find my notes here. A desktop version of this as well. That way the individual can use the app alongside their therapist in the actual session, which is great if you're doing more imaginal exposure for those who have had post-traumatic stress disorder. So we've got a web version that they can take away on their phone, also a desktop version to use in therapy with the therapist or the nurse practitioner. And then Michael, who's going to come up and say a couple of words, has also been working with us to develop an Android app. Okay, so I suppose I'll just sort of talk you through a little bit more.
The mobile version where the person's, if this will work on a phone, it's designed to be used on a small screen. And then we've got another version which is, we're kind of still developing. The mobile app was the main aim of the weekend, and we've got a kind of more of an admin back end that we can go back to the therapist with and pass on the data between the two. This isn't quite ready yet, but we've kind of grown arms and legs a little bit from the original project.
And if I can just say as well, what I really like about this is that we've put in like a panic button. That way, if someone is doing their homework in between their graded exposure sessions and they're having a particularly difficult day, if you click on the panic button, that'll take you to a page of really useful websites and phone numbers should they need that crisis attention. So if you click on breathing space, that'll take you directly to the breathing space website. Same with NHS 24 and the Samaritans. That way they can have a crisis phone number should your therapist not be available, or if you can't wait until the next time that you see your therapist. So that's it. Any questions? Thanks.
Oh, perfect.
How do you measure your own level? That's SUDS?
SUDS, yes.
So how do you measure that?
Well, obviously, it's the subjective unit of distress, and what in the initial session that you have with your patient is you discuss the idea of exposure therapy, and what we do is we sort of tell them what SUDS mean, and then we work through the hierarchy and figure out, everyone can think of an example where something produces a certain level of anxiety in them, and it's very subjective, but it's the individual's perspective of that anxiety which really matters. So all you have to do is just kind of assign a number to how you're feeling. Yeah, is that, I don't know. Yeah.
Thank you for presenting. Can I just ask if anything like this has ever been tried before, and if there's any kind of evidence for how patients experience it in using it?
Well, when we were researching this idea, we found a lot of manage your mood type apps. Happy smiley faces, today I'm feeling sad, today I'm feeling a bit anxious. But there was nothing that could really be used in conjunction with therapy. And I think that's going to be it's sort of a niche area, because hopefully the idea is that in the future it'll cut down on the resources and the capacity of therapists, where if you hand over the power to the patient to do their own therapy, I think that's, it's great that way. They won't need to come back so much for refresher sessions or follow-up sessions. And if you give them the skills to be able to do that without having the therapist there with them, they're more likely to get better much faster. And it's that being able to make sure they do their homework as well, which is also a key part of the therapy, to try and keep that going every day.
At present, we would do this just using pen and paper. So people would take sheets of paper away from the session. They have to fill it in, potentially if your anxiety is about being in the supermarket, to put it in a supermarket. With this, it's much more discreet. Put it in your hand, put it on your phone. It makes it much easier.
Far more private as well. You don't want someone overlooking your shoulder whilst you're filling out this piece of paper. And it wouldn't look any different to someone texting a friend or just playing a game. And I think with the interface, it needs a lot of work, but you could just make it look a bit more fun and just make it sort of blend into what other people tend to do on their mobile phones.
Obviously, it's very, the data you produce is very personal, right? It's subjective. Ultimately, is the result like feedback? Does that ultimately have to come from a sit-down situation with a professional, or could, in theory, based on the numbers that are produced, could the app, for example, give some generic advice to the patient? If they I'm thinking like very generic advice. Like I'm thinking like if you ever use Endomondo, like just tracks your running, eventually that's it. Like go, right?
Yeah.
Could it in effect do something like that? Provide generic advice based on the numbers that are coming out, or is the end result really has to be you have to sit down with your therapist and analyse them?
I think there's scope for messages to come up and just to keep that motivation going. And it's hard if you're trying to get yourself out of the door if you're agoraphobic. Chances of you putting your shoes on and deciding I'm just going to do it today, you need that extra little push. So I think in terms of getting the patient's motivation going, it would be great to have the messages. I obviously don't know whether it'd be feasible, Rich, I don't know if you, but I think it's a great idea to be able to keep them going and have that motivation based on the scores that are coming out. Yeah.